Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for a bookshelf essential. We have a bookshelf essential for you today. Bookshelf Essentials, this is a series of videos created by the great David Wiley over on his channel, where we talk about books that we would never ever get rid of because they are so essential to our personal libraries. And today, I'm going to be talking about a great big book. This is Blackwater by Michael McDowell. This is the great family saga written by Michael McDowell, which is also a horror novel about a river monster. And it's fantastic. This was originally published in 6 different paperbacks. It was a series of 6 slim paperbacks. Started back in 1983, I believe. But it is all one novel. These 6 paperback books did serialize one novel, which is this. It all tells one great big story. And I think this will probably go down as Michael McDowell's masterpiece. Michael McDowell, who wrote a bunch of paperback originals back in the 1980s. I think he wrote something like 7 novels before he got his first one sold, which was The Amulet. He wrote a lot. I think he wrote over 30 books, a lot of them under pseudonyms. I have not read them all. I've read a few of them, but of the books that I have read, this is definitely my favorite. This is just a magnificent book, which tells the story of the Caskey family in Perdido, Alabama, which is a small town by a river. And one day this town floods. The river floods the town. And Oscar Caskey finds a young woman in a hotel. And somehow she slept through the flood and the evacuation and everything. She has a very suspicious story. But she's young and beautiful, and Oscar falls for this woman, Eleanor. And so he rescues her from this hotel where she's trapped. And eventually she marries Oscar, and she marries into this old Southern Alabama family. And we get this multi-generational family saga. Eleanor, as it turns out, is a shape-changing river monster. You know, sometimes you just have shape-changing river monsters in the family. What do you do? But she is a shape-changing river monster, which she keeps secret. But, you know, there are some weird things about Eleanor. And this is just a magnificent book. He writes a little bit in the beginning about Perdido. This is the author's note about the setting of this story. Perdido, Alabama does indeed exist, and in the place I have put it. Yet it does not now, nor ever did it possess the buildings, geography, or population I ascribe to it. The Perdido and Blackwater rivers, moreover, have no junction at all. Yet the landscapes and persons I describe, I venture to say, are not wholly imaginary. So this is, like I said, a big family saga. It's about the Caskey family and the members of the Caskey family. We have a lot of characters in this book, and we follow them for a long time, over time. I read an interview once of Michael McDowell where he talked about families and how he wasn't a big fan of families because he didn't like how, you know, certain members of families could dominate and manipulate other members of the family. A lot of backbiting and things like that. He didn't like the negative aspects of family a heck of a lot. And you see a lot of that in this book. But what you also see in this book are a lot of the good things about families, how members of families can support each other, how members of families can be accepting of others' differences in the family. There's a lot of interesting characters in this book. You have gay characters in this book. some just strange characters in this book. It's really a fascinating glimpse into this old Southern family and the relationships they have with each other, and how one of them just happens to be a river monster, a shape-shifting river monster, who's very mysterious, particularly in the beginning of this book. Eleanor, when we first see her, we know in the beginning of this book that she is what she is. She's a monster, and we learn quickly that she's a shape-shifting river monster that you really, who's very creepy and dangerous and should not be trusted. But she's also a complex character who loves the family. Eleanor she loves Oscar, the man that she married. She loves the family that she's in. She's just, a river monster who will do terrible, awful things because she can transform into this big, loathsome creature who will just, straight up murder you if she feels like, she needs to. And the way this book is done is so interesting because you can kind of get lost in the family narrative as you're reading it and actually forget that it's a horror novel until the horror happens. It can sometimes take you by surprise because you get so involved and invested in the characters and what's going on with the characters in the town and all of that when the horror happens. And this was originally published, like I say, in 6 parts. And in all 6 parts, there's horror that happens. And so this is a horror novel with the things that you would expect to be in a horror novel. It's just mixed in with the big family saga. And I think that's one of the things that some readers of this don't care for, I think, because the horror element is kind of subdued through a lot of it until it happens, and then it's just ghastly and awful. But it is kind of a slow burn for certain sections of the book. It's just really interesting the way it's done. Very much a supernatural story. You have ghosts in this. You have other supernatural things happening. There's a lot that happens in this book. And being a horror novel, particularly a horror novel from the 1980s, ghastly and horrible and terrible things happen to people. But one of the things about this book is that you spend so much time with the main characters in this book. And some terrible things do happen to some of the main characters in this book. And by the time that they happen, they affect you more because you know these characters. If you read a typical like 80s horror novel or see an 80s horror movie where somebody is just killed by the monster, you don't know these characters too well, usually. Usually they're on screen or on the page just a little bit before they're murdered by the monster. And there's some of that going on in this book. But when it happens to a character that you have gotten to know over, maybe hundreds of pages, it has a lot more of an impact. And, some terrible things happen to some characters that you end up caring for in this book. So there is that. It's just a fascinating piece of horror literature. Very impressive book. I probably will read it again one of these days, just because there's so much in here. It's available now as an ebook. It's available as an audiobook. You could read it all sorts of ways. I definitely highly recommend it. It's just a great book. It's one of those big sprawling books that you can get lost in for a few days, and it's one of those books that there are scenes and things that happen in this book that linger in the mind. And you'll think about them long after you put the book down. Certainly I found that to be true. I read this a while ago now, And I've kind of been thinking about it ever since. It's one of those books. Does take some time to read. How long is this thing? It's 800 pages, but it's a great 800 pages. It's a mammoth that's certainly worth reading if you like this kind of thing, supernatural horror. And at the same time, like I said, a big family drama with all of these characters that you get to know, and the town becomes a real place in your mind as you read it. Wonderful, wonderful sense of place in this book. So yeah, highly recommended. Blackwater by Michael McDowell. I will catch you next time.